Hello and welcome to another episode of the ANF podcast. Again, this week it's just myself doing the introduction as Al is skiving, and he couldn't be bothered to turn up. So I've no news for you. I've absolutely no news for you, except to say that this episode is another of our feature focuses on Ireland. And this week we spoke to, well, we didn't do it this week. We did it quite a while ago now, but we wanted to release them after the summer. But this week we spoke to Andrew Walker, who works for Banardos in Ireland. Now, Banardos in Ireland is a separate organisation to the one in the UK and other parts of the world. I think there's quite a few of them scattered around. But I was interested to speak to Andrew. And the reason for that was really to find out more about how adoption works in Ireland. And I have to say, mind blown. I had assumed that it was very much the same as the UK. How wrong was I? We both were. Neither of us were aware. And I think that there's historically there's a lot of things that go on in Ireland around adoption, and that's potentially why it might be different today. But it was a really interesting chat with Andrew, as it is with all of our guests, and he was. His role at Banardos is more to do with kind of post-adoption. He's a project leader for the post-adoption service, and he did his research for us and he did his homework for us to be able to answer our questions essentially. But what was really interesting was the kind of, I guess, the support that adults receive now in Ireland, and how that all works, as well as the kind of the adoption process itself. So definitely worth a listen. It was really interesting, and it really kind of gave me some food for thought in terms of how adoption works in Ireland. And really it's just a useful listen. So I hope you enjoy it. We have one more of the series of the Irish focus coming up fairly soon, maybe in the next couple of weeks actually. So I hope you're enjoying them, and I hope that being back at school and all that sort of stuff is going well. Al and I will be back. He's not really skiving. Well, maybe he might be, I don't know. But we will be back with a full podcast soon. It's just been so manically busy for us both this last couple of months. So yeah, we need to get on that, and we need to bring back the bants, as we say. Anyway, take care, keep safe, and we'll talk to you soon. So today we're continuing on with our Irish theme, and not an Irish accent this time, but we are joined by Andrew Walker, who is from Banardos Ireland. I was going to put your nickname on the end of it, but I thought I'd better not, just in case, Andrew, because I wasn't sure if we should share that or not. But I just think it's funny. But welcome to the podcast, and thanks for coming along.
No bother at all. Great to be here, guys.
Hello.
And
a great Scottish accent there. So
yes, indeed. Yeah, I've been here 21 years, I think, this year. And as I said, my kids take the mick, because obviously if I'm talking to a Scottish person, all of a sudden I'm 10 times more Scottish. So I hope your international listeners are able to understand as we kind of get into this. So
that's fine, no problem. If I don't understand you, I'll let you know.
We do have a Peruvian listener, so he's probably lost. Bless him.
I'd imagine so.
He's probably
Peruvian Pete.
Yeah, Peruvian Pete. So anyway, like I said there, I mean, we're kind of looking into different systems. We've looked at America, we've looked at various different countries, and obviously living in Ireland, specifically me, I'm very interested to find out more about the system. So perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Banardos, and then we'll start chatting. Really,
okay, great stuff. Yeah. So I work for Banardos Post Adoption Service. The Post Adoption Service has been part of Banardos in Ireland since the 70s. It has two sides to it, I suppose: an adult adoption service and also a service for children and families. And I'll talk more, I suppose, in detail later about those two different sides. But the adoption service is very much a post-adoption service. So Banardos in Ireland was never involved in arranging adoptions, unlike Banardos in the UK. And so it was always seen, I suppose, as being a neutral or independent place.
Right.
In the 70s, there would have been quite a lot of domestic adoption still in Ireland, run by different both state and religious run agencies. And Bernardos would have been seen as being a bit of an outsider, I suppose. So we're kind of in a nice position in that we work with all sides of the adoption triangle. We work with birth mothers and birth family. We work with adoptive parents, and we work with adopted children, teens, and adults.
Okay.
Can I? All right. Already, you've fried my noodles, right? So, because I think that it's sort of being in my little England bubble. You don't necessarily look beyond your borders, and we know that adoption happens everywhere. But then actually, we realise that different cultures have such a different experience of adoption. In some cultures, it just doesn't exist. But Ireland has got a really quite a specific history that kind of has the church woven into it and a lot of stuff. So could you sort of like give us a potted history of that? I don't want to put you on the spot, and I'm not expecting dates or
but
can you just paint a picture of the context?
Yeah, well, as Scott mentioned, that's a dangerous question because my nickname in school that you mentioned was Walkie Talkie, because I like to talk.
I absolutely love that. Honestly.
Yeah, so I like to talk, and this is an area quite close to my heart because, as well as working with the Post Adoption Service for many years, I would have worked for a family tracing service for people who were raised in the industrial schools. So the industrial schools were large institutions, that would have had various commissions investigating the way that they were run and the abuses that happened in them. So, but one of the abuses that happened was separation from family and single, children born to single mothers being separated from family and from siblings and so on. So, as you said, the kind of history and context of adoption in Ireland is kind of rooted in the huge kind of Catholicism of the country, the importance of the church following the break from Britain in the early 1900s, and the role that the church would have taken in, I suppose, in civil society in terms of social issues. They would have run the schools, they would have run the industrial schools, they would have run the hospitals, etc. So adoption actually only came into Ireland in 1952. However, there would have been adoption-like arrangements happening prior to that, and there would also have been international adoption. There was a scandal that would have broken in the 1990s about children who were sent from Ireland to America in the 40s and 50s to be adopted at a time when adoption wasn't legal in Ireland. So in the 1950s, when adoption came in, a number of adoption agencies, I suppose, were already in operation who would have been involved in boarding out of children, which was a bit like fostering. Some would have been involved in, adoptions to America. And they would have then, kind of continued on arranging adoptions, which grew steadily kind of through the 1950s and into the 1960s, kind of peaking in the early 1970s at about 1,400 adoptions a year, thereabouts. And then starting to gradually fall in the 1970s as society changed, and particularly as a payment for single mothers became available. It was certainly part of the mix in terms of the numbers starting to fall, as well as kind of societal change, really. So the other story then for adoption in Ireland is the large number of international adoptions that would have occurred. In some ways to replace the fact that domestic adoption, the numbers of children available for domestic adoption, kind of fell through the 80s and 90s. And by the early 2000s, international adoption became kind of, an option. And at one stage at its peak, there was about 400 children a year being adopted from internationally into Ireland. So that might not seem very much if you're a big country like America or the UK. But there's nearly as many international adoptees in Ireland as there is in the UK, I understand. There's about close to 5,000, just over 5,000 international adoptions, which I think is actually quite comparable. So per head of population, it'd be much higher.
That is, I mean, it's fascinating because I think that like I said, we just sort of presume that adoption is just done. And I think that the more you dig around, you realize that sort of culturally, Ireland's and Irish people's experience of adoption is just so different. All the same words, just a different order. And so how does that then? Sorry, Scott, I've totally taken over the interview that you're in, and you'd given him a list of questions. I confess I didn't even read the list of questions. So I have no idea what we're meant to talk about.
The one time I do any preparation, and he doesn't.
Exactly. The one time.
Yeah, there you go.
Actually, I didn't. I'm just checking. I didn't send them. So there you go.
Oh, that's fine. So does that mean that the work that you do is there an element of the weight and heaviness around that work? Is that kind of, you talked about tracing, which sounds like a really complex work. Is that work that you've done historically? So can you tell us a bit about that? Okay.
Adoption is fascinating. It's fascinating. And I think it's why, there's this huge feature in literature, both true life stories and kind of fictional literature. So certainly kind of in our work in the post-adoption service on both the adults and children's side, there's loss involved in adoption. So there's sadness. But the interesting thing about adoption is there's also joy because, there's the creation of a family. So, it's interesting that those two natures, and I think that's what makes it interesting. In terms of the heaviness, I suppose, of the family tracing, it's very interesting work because what you're doing is it's kind of almost like detective work into the past. You have to get records from 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago. There might be very scarce records or unreliable information, and then you have to try and project that forward as to what happened to that mother or that family. What happened at that time that meant they couldn't look after their child. Often it was just the case that it was out of wedlock. And then secondly, what happened to them after that? And obviously in many cases, they maybe went on to marry and have further children. But this was a secret of the first pregnancy or the first child. So, you might be approaching, a birth mother who's carried the secret a long time, or you might be approaching siblings after the birth mother has died to break the news that they have, an older sibling. And this might be when they're in their 70s or 80s. I've clients in their 90s that have been involved in reunions with siblings. So it's it's fascinating work. Really interesting.
I mean, I can't imagine how you start that conversation. The need for sensitivity, but also the drive for transparency and kind of to shine a light. But
yeah. Well, that's it. As I said, it's a momentous kind of occasion, really. The day that person, you write your carefully worded letter, and you get back, so that if somebody else picks it up, they don't know the family's whole business, but the person who gets it gets enough information that they're intrigued and they want to call you back. So, and then explaining the reasons why you're making contact with them and why, you think there's a possibility that, your client may be related to them. So I said, it's very interesting. And then the mediation work to try and reconnect people once they get past that potential shock. Now, in some cases they might know, or they might have been told, but they didn't know where to start looking. But in many cases, in that work, in many cases they wouldn't. If it's an adoption reunion, the adopted person, in 99% of cases will know that they're adopted, and the birth mother will know what this letter is about. But it's where you're contacting siblings in that older cohort that maybe they won't know what it's about. So as I said, that's kind of an extra element to it, I suppose.
Can I ask one final question on that before I let Scott get a word in edgeways? Who funds that?
So in 1999, the state apologised to the former residents of the industrial schools who had bravely come forward and shared their stories and their experiences in the kind of 1990s. And they set up a number of kind of reparation. They set up a redress board to pay for some financial compensation. They set up a commission to investigate this called the Ryan Report, that published its findings in 2010, which kind of had international headlines, I suppose, as it fully vindicated the stories that people had been saying about the abuses that happened. But one of the first things they did was to set up a family tracing service, because they felt that it was a need that didn't need to wait for the rest of the legal wranglings around compensation and so on, that they could set this up immediately, and there was a need to set it up immediately. So Banardos basically was given that contract by the Department of Education, who had the responsibility, and it's, as I said, it's maintained. It's much smaller service now than it was, because as I said, it's largely met the needs of that client group, but it is still being run by Banardos. And it would have grown out of the post-adoption service, which, as I said, in the 1990s, the post-adoption service, which would have been seen as being quite independent, started to get phone calls from people who'd been in the industrial schools who would say, I'm not adopted, but, I was in a home. How can I search for my family? And they would have done what they could to try and help people. So I suppose they were in a position then to, get that contract. And as I said, it's a fully funded service, and as I said, it's been a success, I suppose, over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it sounds like the state took responsibility for what happened, and it was kind of just something that they had to provide, I guess.
I think so. In terms of that, as I said again, some of the survivor groups may argue differently in terms of the other services or other parts of that response from the state. But certainly in terms of the family tracing aspect, it does, as I said, it would appear that they saw this was the responsibility they had to take on, and as I said, they've been very supportive of that work, I suppose, over the last 20 odd years.
Yeah, because I guess that's just one element of stuff that they should have done. They may not have done the rest of it. So I guess that's only one element, isn't it? And I mean, just going back to like your timeline as well. I mean, it sounds very familiar. If it's maybe a slightly different in terms of the domestic adoption rate dropping. And what struck me when you're talking about that as well. I mean, I don't know what you know about adoption in the UK and stuff, but certainly they're kind of, we're moving away from that filling a need for couples who can't have children now, and it's about the needs of the child rather than the needs of a couple. And is that the same here? I mean, has that changed over the time here as well? And is it like, because I'm thinking when you're doing international adoption, I mean, that's not something that's just provided by the state. I'm assuming. I don't, because that's why we've got you on, so we can find out how it works. But certainly, in the UK, certainly in the UK, international adoption, you would be assessed by an agency, and then you would go to however it works from there. And we've had Sandhu, who's the CEO of International Adoption
Centre.
Yeah, actually, that's it. International Adoption Centre. He's been on a couple of times actually on the podcast, and we've chatted to him. So, I mean, is it the same here? Sorry, I've waffled a bit there, but is that how it's working? Is that how it's going?
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's a few aspects to the question, and I think the first one, which is to say, is the child front and center of the process? And I would say that Ireland has certainly moved in that direction. I suppose for your listeners, there's two main state bodies that are involved in Ireland in adoption in Ireland, domestic and international. The Adoption Authority, that used to be called the Adoption Board, but the Adoption Authority of Ireland is the body that legalised adoptions. Okay, they would have adoption records for every legal adoption that happened in Ireland going back to 1952, and they also have the Register of International Adoptions. So I suppose they ratify that an adoption meets the legal standard. The second agency that would be involved would be TUSLA, which is the Child and Family Agency. Slightly different from other services, but the Child and Family Agency was set up a number of years ago to separate out kind of children's and social services from the general health and social welfare system. So TUSLA would be responsible for the assessment of adoptive parents, and they're also responsible for information and tracing for adopted people. So I said Banardos would have done that for that cohort I talked about, but for adopted people, at this stage, all the independent agencies have closed and their records have been transferred to the state, and TUSLA have those records and have the responsibility for kind of information and tracing. So TUSLA have 2 involvements in adoption for the adult side there, and also for assessing adoptive parents. TUSLA would also, because they're the child welfare agency, they would also have responsibility for fostering and for child protection. So the reason why, one of the reasons why this for the small numbers of domestic adoption in Ireland would have been that the kind of constitution would have been seen to favour the rights of the family, and really protect the rights of the family. And generally, that one aspect of that would be that a child who is born to a married couple wasn't able to be adopted. And that would have been the case kind of brought in the 1952 Adoption Act to be in line with that aspect of the Constitution. And that would have stayed the same right up until, I can't remember, I think it was possibly 2010. I may be wrong about that, but certainly into the 2000s. So a child who might be in the care system, even if the parents wished for that child to be adopted, my understanding is it wouldn't have been possible.
Right. Wow.
So the children's referendum that we had, we love a referendum in Ireland, and we had a referendum in, I think it was 2012, on the rights of the child, which put the rights of children front and centre in the Constitution as well. And one aspect then is that then changed I suppose both the culture and also the legalities, but also the culture in terms of sitting thinking about children who were in the care system, perhaps getting permanency through adoption in their placements. But as I said, that's only kind of came through really in the last 10 years. And, the numbers are relatively small. I know that, Scott, before we talked this, you'd kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that aspect of things. So I had to do a little bit of homework, and the adoption authorities, which has an excellent website, really transparent. Their most recent annual report is only 2021. 2022 is not out yet, but in 2021, in Ireland, there was in a couple of years before, there was an average of about 5 or 6 infant adoptions. Okay, in the whole country, about 60,000 babies born, 6 of them adopted. Thereabouts. Step parent adoptions in 2021, there were 65. So that would be where a step parent would adopt the child. So again, very small numbers. And from long-term foster care, there was 24 children adopted in 2021. Now, 2021 was a year of the pandemic, and it's certainly possible that definitely had an impact on international adoption. But there you go. That's the numbers. So you can see that the numbers are pretty small. But obviously really significant for all those families and those children.
Yeah, I mean, I remember. I just going on the numbers thing. The first involvement that we had with TUSLA, because we had an incident. We went and presented ourselves to TUSLA before they rung us when we first moved back to Ireland. Okay. It was interesting because when we sat in front of the duty social worker, because obviously she was responsible for chatting to us to see what our issue was. And when we explained that, our son was adopted, he had FASD, and she went, we don't really have very many adoption around these parts. She said, I think we've had 3 in the last 5 years. Okay. Yeah. Of course, having come from the UK and having worked for Adoption UK and been quite involved in it, I was like, 3 in 5 years. How the hell could that be? But it is. It's not a huge thing here, is it? Like,
no. Well, as in terms of children living in Ireland, no, it isn't. I mean, as I said. But one kind of stat that I think I kind of would often sit and say is that there are 50,000 adopted people in Ireland, 5,000 extra when you count internationally adopted, but 5,000 domestically adopted. Mainly adults.
Yeah.
Each one of them has, in most cases, an adoptive mother and an adoptive father.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of them definitely has a birth mother and a birth father.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you're at 250,000 people who are directly affected by adoption.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's, and if you add in aunties, uncles on both adoptive sides and, birth family sides, pretty quickly, most families in Ireland have some connection to adoption. Yeah. Okay, but at the same time, as I said, for children, as I said, the numbers obviously, are very small.
Mm.
Mm. I was trying to do some maths with approximate figures, and it seems like in the UK we would adopt like at least 3 times plus as many for every one child in Ireland. We would adopt 3. There'd be 3 adopted, but I'm not sure exactly, including the step parent adoption as well. So it feels like it. I mean, I think like we said at the beginning, it feels like a totally different context, and how the public and society feel about adoption is clearly hugely impacted by the catastrophe of the industrial schools and the Magdalene sisters and all of that kind of bleak history.
There's some truth in that as I said, certainly there's adoption in Ireland generally is associated with, as I said, with shame, secrecy, rather than, as I said, the 50,000 people who joined family homes instead of industrial schools, or the 5,000 children, who've been adopted into Ireland who, and again, we might talk a little bit about some of the issues for those children, but again, who are growing up in, 99.9% of the cases, loving families. And as I said, there certainly, there certainly should be more space for the happy stories, I suppose.
So we feel like we've set the scene. We've got a comprehensive the history of adoption in Ireland, comprehensive there. So tell us a bit about your day job now, then, because you're a post-adoption support worker, aren't you? That's your phrase we would know. But anyone listening to this would go, "Oh yeah, right, got that." That context, context is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a bit about. I suppose I'll tell you a bit about our service, and I don't want it to sound like an advertising thing for either come and work with Banardos or Brilliant or anything.
Give
like
us your
that,
money,
or exactly, or give us your money, or come to us and we'll solve all your problems. I don't want it to.
Well, if you do, then I'll be there tomorrow morning. Be careful what you say.
Yeah, there you go. So I've a really interesting job. I'm the project leader for the children's service, and we have a project leader over the adult service. Our service has expanded massively, and actually, if you'll indulge me, I just want to pay tribute to the I suppose the founders of our service, because one of them in March last year retired after 30 years of incredible work to birth mothers. That would be Patricia White. And this week last year, Christine Hennessy, who would have been, I suppose, my mentor and a real standout figure in adoption in Ireland, sadly died suddenly, just as she was seeing her dream of the post-adoption service coming to fruition with a kind of expanded adult service, expanded children's service, with a geographical spread of Dublin, Cork, and Galway. And as I said, I just wanted to kind of pay tribute to all of her work this week, especially. So I would have been working with Christine for 15 years. and I would have then taken over the kind of project leader position. And I have a fantastic team of children's therapists, play therapists, art therapists, social workers, all working as project workers, which is Banardos' title. But as I said, with great and varied experience, I suppose. And we work with, on the children's side, we would work with adoptive families, domestic or international. But as you can see, the numbers are very much the international adoptees. Lots of teenagers, because again, the bulk of, the numbers of international adoptions were highest in the early 2000s, which are kind of coming of age now. And on the children's side, we also do work with kind of 19, 20, 21-year-olds as well. Because we kind of feel that, a 19-year-old who was adopted from China probably has more in common with a 17-year-old adopted from China than they would a 55-year-old adopted in Ireland, I suppose. And as I said, we offer kind of individual support to families. We have a helpline. We're very accessible. We have in our 3 centres, we would do individual work with children and families. This would be similar to some ways to the UK, in that we went to the UK when we started the children's service, and we went to Family Futures in London and some of the post-adoption centre in London, and we would have seen what they were doing, and we would have got some of the same trainings, in DDP, therapy, sensory attachment integration and intervention, which is now being kind of rolled out across Banardos actually. So as I said, we would have kind of taken all these trainings on. We would have organised a few conferences to get people like Dan Hughes over and Holly Van Gulden and some of these kind of international speakers. Louise Baumer, an excellent trainer for teachers. And I suppose would have gradually built up a reputation as being trauma-informed, attachment-focused, and as I said, I suppose on the side of adoptive families, really. And using our experience of working for 30 odd years doing groups with adopted adults and with birth mothers to kind of inform our understanding of working with children and teenagers around identity. Because the adopted adults work, when people are able to sit and look back on what it was like to be a teenager, there's a lot of learning for us to then hopefully use in our work with teenagers.
I was reflecting on, it's a national service, isn't it? So that makes it, is it?
Yeah, no, it is. So you saw my face, and I suppose the difficulty with it, we are a national service, and TUSLA fund our service. They fund our service, again, 100%. And they've been very supportive of our service in terms of expanding. And we do try to cover the whole country. However, we only have 3 offices. And, I wish I could say hand on heart that we do cover the whole country, but we do our best. And I think online work certainly has allowed us to do that. And we do have flexibility. So as I said, but we are a relatively, we still are a relatively small service. I think we have the equivalent of about 8 or 9 full-time people on our children's team. So obviously we do refer people to kind of other statutory services and to private services as well, maybe especially if they're not easily accessible to where we are.
Because Ireland, I'm not Irish, but I've visited a few times. But what sort of struck me as a visitor was that how rural it is, and how there's not a lot of people live there, so it feels very spaced out. Yeah. And so there's places in Ireland that are quite a long way away from Dublin.
They are, they are.
Because I think the temptation is like an English view, looking at the map, you go, oh, it's quite small, isn't it? But it doesn't feel like that, does it? It feels like there's lots of hidden corners. I think the reason I asked if it was a national service was because I thought what was peculiar, and Scott, you might be able to confirm this for me, is that we have in the UK, the service that we have, post-adoption support, isn't open to international adopted children, is it? There's no statutory right. So if you adopted from wherever, China, Cuba, whatever, you were on your own, really. And I think that, again, seems really cool. It just seems, well, Makes perfect sense.
Well, I think
Children.
I think in the UK it depends on the agency, doesn't it? I mean, there's in each local authority they have a responsibility in the UK, whereas here that responsibility isn't held by the local authority, because it's a service that's kind of commissioned, I guess, from the Children and Young People's Service, if you like. But I do, because I know that things like, I think it was Pupil Premium Plus in the UK that you could apply for if your child was adopted. I think in school, I think at one stage, I can't remember if it's changed. Yeah, I know.
Work it out, won't we?
But definitely, if you had adopted from abroad, you couldn't get that
fund or whatever. Okay.
Yeah, so there was a few kind of differences, and I know that Al and I are both on the Adopted Reference Group, which is the Department for Education's kind of, I don't know what you'd call it. It's like a load of adopters turn up. They do have one for special guardianships. They do one, all that sort of stuff, and that was a really big focus of ours a couple of years back when we noticed there was a difference in that. So.
Yeah. I think in terms of international adoption, I think that, to be fair to the Irish different state bodies, there is a sense that these children are Irish citizens. As soon as they are adopted, they are Irish citizens, and as I said, our service, I suppose, is a specialist service, kind of for them. And as I said, funded by the state, because it was gradually recognised that this was a group of children who did have some specialised needs, who would be referred to child and adolescent mental health services, which should be kind of statutory services. They'd be referred to them at the rate of 18%, which I think is about four times the average population. And then some of those issues, it might be that there's significant kind of whether it's developmental trauma or some other kind of mental health issue there. But some of those issues were also linked perhaps to identity, or linked to kind of early attachment stuff. So as I said, there's been a recognition of that and a shift to that to try and help support our relatively small service to help this cohort of children.
Yeah, and I mean, we have to bear in mind, because we're talking about the size of the country, the population of Ireland is similar to the population of
Scotland.
Manchester, Scotland, yeah. And you look at the geography of Scotland and how big, how rural some of that is. But you think that every local authority in Scotland has responsibility for post-adoption services.
Okay.
So you're doing it with just 9 people for the whole country, and that's not a small task. But if you compare the numbers, in terms of numbers that have been adopted, I guess it's relative, really, isn't it, in some way?
I don't know. Despite the accent, I couldn't tell you about Scotland.
Oh, could you not? Oh, I could tell you all day about that. Don't worry about that. You sound more Scottish than I do, and I've been. Yeah, we've probably been away at the same time, actually.
Yeah,
anyway,
I get accused of people. Some people think I'm from the north because I have that many Irish phrases. A slight hybrid accent, I think, sometimes. Yeah.
No, you're fine. Accents are accents. Right, I'm just looking at my questions here. So, and in terms of, because I'm on your mailing list, as in Banardos mailing list for post-adoption, I've never used it, because you're right. In terms of some of the stuff that's done face to face, it would be, it's less in the kind of, I want to say, the country where I live, because I don't live anywhere near Dublin. I live close to Galway, nowhere near Cork.
Okay.
But in terms of stuff that's available, it is mostly online. But what does the adoption support look like that you offer for the children, young people, and their families? And I just want to see if we can compare it to the issues in the UK in terms of adoption support.
So do you mean the issues that we might be trying to help people with, or how do we help to help with, or both, I suppose?
Both, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we work with children from, as I said, not quite, we wouldn't work with many babies, but we have had a few, 3-year-olds walk in the door. we would work with a lot of a very common referral age would be around about the age of 8.
Right.
And again, some of your expert listeners might understand why, that around the age of 8 is the stage when the kind of penny drops about adoption and adaptive grieving. It's also, for children who've maybe had early trauma, it's also the kind of stage where in school the difference between them and their peers is starting to become more obvious. That when they're in junior infants, which is kind of the 5-year-olds, there might be lots of kids who aren't very good at taking turns. There might be lots of kids who are very sensitive to correction, struggle with separation, that kind of thing. By the time you get to 8, most of the class can manage that, but maybe some of the families that we would see would still struggle with those issues, again linked to the kind of insecurity that comes from being in an orphanage or children's home with limited carers for the first kind of year, 2 years of your life, which would be the history of a lot of the kids that we would work with. So I suppose, with those 8-year-olds, the kind of work that we would do would be a lot of parenting work to help the parents understand how normal this behaviour was, given the circumstances of the child's early years. And we would often use therapy, which is a kind of directive type of play therapy. There would quite often be sensory issues. We don't have an OT on our team. A lot of the children would have maybe had some private OT or maybe some state funded OT, but we don't have an OT on our team. But we would use we've done sensory attachment intervention, which is a kind of OT developed program, and that would involve an element of, as I said, a kind of deep pressure, and also, I suppose, some parts work, some projects about sitting trying to help a child identify their parts, maybe even touching on where that might have came from in terms of their adoption, their birth family, the ways that they're like their parents, and the ways that maybe if they're unlike their parents, maybe that's a way that they're like their birth parents. That some of those talents might come from their birth parents or whatever. But and then I suppose the kind of next key age might be just changing school, starting secondary school, which in Ireland would happen usually around about the age of 12. It's a stage where for adopted kids they might start to be asked questions again, especially internationally and transracially adopted kids. So they might have got through the kind of 8-9-year-old stage where they're being asked lots of questions about their adoption and they're kind of an object of curiosity. Then by the time they're 11 or 12, they're having to face that again because they're going to be meeting a whole new group of people, and they might be starting to feel, as most teenagers do, they don't want to stand out, they don't want to feel different, and in this way they are different. So we might be trying to help prepare them or support them around managing friendships and so on. And then I suppose into the teenage years, again, lots of identity work, lots of normalizing, as well, I suppose, as just some kind of self-esteem work and managing anxiety. A lot of children would be carrying a huge amount of anxiety even into their teens, and then that can come out with the pressures of exams, the pressures of first love, the pressures of peer relationships, and so on. And obviously that can come out in all kind of manners of kind of risk-taking behaviour and so on as well, that can be very difficult for parents to manage. So I suppose as well, all the way through, we're doing a lot of kind of parent coaching as well. So hopefully that covers a lot of what we do. I think the other thing I suppose we would do, so that's individual work. The other thing we would do a lot of would be group work. So again, maybe I can talk a wee bit more about that as well.
Well, I was just going to say that sounds very, I don't want to say very different, because actually I'm sure there are some agencies that offer that in the UK, but as a kind of package of support, that actually sounds quite well thought through compared to maybe some places where it would just be like, okay, we don't know what we want to do. We don't know how to do that. That kind of way. So it does sound, I don't know. Do you think that, Al, or is it just me talking?
Well, I was running because I thought, every bit of it, we all get the same landmarks and the same touchstones, but I just thought running it as a national service for such a small cohort of children, it gives you a gives you a bigger picture that, and
yeah, I've grown up with these families, you know, because as I said, when we started this work in 2008, you know, many of them, you know, they were young kids then, and now they're older teenagers, many of them. So I've seen them. And again, I've seen them, you know, come to me when they're 8 and having those issues, and then coming back when they're changing school and so on. So I suppose the advantage of our longevity, really.
Yeah.
But as you're talking, I'm kind of putting in context, you know, the fact around, you know, that high level of international adoptions in the early 2000s, the tiny number of children who were being adopted, which sounds like a really good, so for all the right reasons, a tiny number. In 10 years' time, you're not going to have a job.
Yeah. The only thing is information and tracing. And there also is the chance, and I do think this will happen, that there will be an increasing number of children who are adopted from the foster care system. So, you know, that is I suppose a priority for TUSLA, to start to try and look at that more as an option for permanency for children, and it's something that they're working towards.
Wow.
So we have some involvement at that stage, but because that's pre-adoption, you know, it's not fair for a post-adoption service